I'm here today with Patrick O. Smith, author of ACDF, The Informed Patient. Patrick grew up in New England. He's a military veteran who's also served as a law enforcement officer, a federal agent, a peer counselor, and a trained crisis intervention team member. He's currently a life coach, counselor, and he offers spiritual guidance to those in need. He wrote this book after having undergone the procedure himself and thinking that his experience might help others. So, Patrick, thanks for being here. And if we could get started, perhaps you could tell me a little bit more about why you wrote the book and what your experience was like.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Chris. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the book. The book came about after I had undergone anterior cervical discectomy and fusion, also known as ACDF in the clinical community. During a interview with my orthopedic surgeon, I was having a discussion with him about how I couldn't find any information that was for the layman. I either found technical literature that was for medical students going through medical school, or the old-fashioned Google internet search, which led me down paths of chat boards and all misinformed information. So I couldn't really find information on what it was like to experience the surgery from pre-op to post-op. So again, that discussion came up with my orthopedic surgeon, who said, pointed at me and said, "You should write a book."
Can you talk a little bit about the trauma that instigated the need for the ACDF surgery?
If I was able to go back at any given point, it would have been in 2006. I had a motocross accident. I was a weekend warrior rider, and I had an accident which ended up in an ER visit. But I fell from a great height and sustained some trauma to the body as well as the head. And while I was in the ER, I was given an MRI to figure out if there was any damage to the skull or internal bleeding, things of that nature. And one of the things that I noted, that this is years later, was after the MRI results came back, looking back in my historical records, I noted that the MRI only came down to, I want to say, C2 or C3. In my book, I note this. When they're dealing with a skull possibility of the skull being injured, if you're not complaining of neck pain, and when the ER physician or nurse, when they palpitate the neck, and if there's no distortion and you have good mobility, they're not suspecting any cervical injuries at that time. So years later, I discovered that I had wished that MRI went down further into the cervical area, because it would have probably revealed discs that were ruptured. So that was the catalyst, if you will, for me to undergo the surgery years later.
What exactly caused you to go into the doctor in the first place?
Yeah, so the initial symptoms were muscle tension in the back of the neck, radiating shoulder pain into the fingers, and as I discuss in the book, it's my thumb and index finger had numbness and tingling. And I originally went in for this severe radiating pain, which, if you have this neuropathy, which is nerve impingement, going into the hands, back muscle, it's very debilitating and very painful. So I originally went in, and my general practitioner, family physician, said that he knew immediately it was impingement of the C6, C7 region, and he said you should get checked out further by an orthopedic surgeon and have an MRI done.
So when you found out that you had to have one, or that it was recommended to you, what was your reaction? What was your initial experience?
Yeah, that's a good question. My initial reaction to finding out surgery, at first you're kind of beside yourself, because you think that you're going in, for muscle pain or some sort of strain of the tendon or some other ailment that you think is tissue related, and then you find out that there's degradation in the cervical area, and the tissue is impinging on your spinal cord. So my initial reaction was a bit of shock at first. I didn't know how to take it because I didn't really have any idea of this surgery prior to that, other than working as a medic in my law enforcement career. I had a little bit of knowledge about the cervical area, but not being told you need neck fusion surgery. So it was a little bit of a shock. A little bit of history. In the 1950s, ACDF surgery was developed for Pott's disease, which is a kind of like arthritis of the neck, where the cervical bones disintegrate and begin to break down. So in an effort to give strength to the cervical neck, the disc is taken out and it's fused together. And there's several different ways you can fuse it, with a orthopedic prosthetic device, or a donor bone. So what they do is, in earlier anterior cervical discectomy and fusion, anterior meaning the front, in the earlier days, they used to go through the back of the neck, which was a more invasive surgery, which cut into the muscle. And as you can imagine, that took more time to heal. Going through the front is a little more technical, because as you can imagine, you're dealing with a lot of vital parts in there. So this surgery is not a light surgery by any means. So basically, they go through the front of the neck and they take out the old disc and they insert a implant, usually made out of polyethyl ketone, which is known as PEEK, or again, a bone transplant from a donor or yourself, which they'll take out of the hip usually. Obviously, if they take it from your own body, it immediately grafts and is more acceptable to the to your body. It doesn't see it as a foreign body, and it doesn't reject it.
Okay. Well, so with the caveat that, of course, anything that we're talking about here is something you should specifically talk with your physician about, and that everybody's going to be different. Everybody's going to have their own specific needs. But specific to your experience, what were the kinds of things that you needed to do to prepare?
Chris, that's a good question. In preparation for this surgery, there really isn't much to prepare for. Many ACDF patients that undergo anterior cervical discectomy and fusion are trauma patients. So they don't have any warning whatsoever. They're usually unconscious, or if they're not unconscious, they're quickly unconscious before they're rolled into the pre-op and prepared for surgery. They don't have much choice. The surgeon, the neurosurgeon or the orthopedic surgeon, makes a decision based on a MRI scan, on the fly, comes up with a a course of action as far as what cervical disc, if they need to be fused. So there's a lot of pressure on them to make a quick informed decision about that. So anyone approaching any surgery, obviously you want to be as healthy as possible. So eating right, the cessation of smoking, drinking alcohol, or your nutrition, and getting in the right frame of body conditioning. You want to prepare yourself, because while you're recovering, your body will go into a bit of atrophy. So you always want to prepare and put yourself in the best physical condition you can, if you're lucky enough to have the afforded advance notice of undergoing ACDF surgery, or any surgery for that matter. When you first wake up from ACDF surgery, you had surgery. It is, I won't kid anybody, it is painful. I relate it to it being hit by a truck. I wasn't prepared for the reality of waking up in such pain. They give you some pretty heavy doses of, morphine, or, even greater than that, other pain medication. As the day progresses, it does slowly get better. Once the body recognizes, what's going on, and it kind of somehow self-regulates and kind of self-manages the pain too. So you're working with both, and obviously with all the warnings going on with pain medications, physicians are really nervous about prescribing, potent medications post-op for long term. Everyone's different with respect to pain tolerance, and pain in of itself is a whole another mystifying, ball game. But I think that's individual. I wouldn't, I'm a little bit more sensitive to pain, a little hyperalgia. Again, it's all relative to the patient's experience. Maybe some people have broken their arm or leg, or some women have given birth, so that's extremely painful. So it's all relative as far as the pain. So that's just my perspective, and I wouldn't rely on my personal experience. Won't necessarily be your experience. So anybody looking at this, I don't want to scare anybody either, because it's totally manageable and doable. It's not something that you should fear.
And of course, you're doing it to get out of pain to begin with. You're doing it. You went into surgery, for example, because you had chronic pain.
Yeah, that's a really good question, because the minute I woke up, and we discussed earlier how I was in a bit of pain when I first woke up, and it felt like being hit by a truck. At the same time, I realized that, and I noticed right away, I looked down at my hand and said, oh, the pain, the neuropathy in my right hand was totally gone. And that's, the physician, the next day at 6 a.m., he said, is the pain in your arm gone? I said, yep. I said, I feel great, other than, the post-op surgery, but the pain was gone. And yeah, that was a good feeling to have that, not hurting anymore.
Can you take us through some of the stages of recovery, range of motion improvement, and even up to where you are today?
It took me about a year, a full year, to where I was 100% without, any effects from the surgery. But there were milestones in the beginning. I remember at, week 4 to 6 weeks, I started doing push-ups for the first time. Very light, calisthenics, to where you can move and stretch. You can imagine, any piece of the body that's put out of, sideline, so to speak, it affects your entire body. So you do get stiff, a little atrophy. But there were milestones, throughout. It does take a while. Any strenuous exercise, even if when my physician cleared me, my orthopedic surgeon cleared me to do, strenuous exercise, you could still tell there was remnants from that. And if you push too hard, again, mountain biking, climbing, running, lifting heavy objects, you did feel afterwards the residual side effects.
Where were you mentally? I mean, were you very conscious of this surgery that had been taking place? And when you ride a mountain bike now, are you worried about further injury, or are you more comfortable? Do you feel basically back to who you were before the surgery?
Yeah, that's on a personal case-by-case basis. I think I felt, after surgery, you're very aware that you've had surgery, and you're very protective of that area for the first several months. But then by the time, month 5 and 6 come around, you're anxious to get back to normal and do the things that you did before, like biking, walking, running, jogging, swimming. And I didn't have any reservations at a certain point, about falling, or I'm sure, again, it's how, the psyche or your mind wants to, it depends on how fearless or fearful you are. And I've never been that way. So I didn't have any fear as far as getting back. I just wanted to get back as quick as possible to, activity levels.
And you feel basically like the surgery was a success, that you were able to do that?
Yeah, I couldn't have either gotten more lucky or had a really good surgeon, an orthopedic surgeon who, in my book I discuss, I think he had done 1,100 at the time. So I would say my surgery was a complete success. And I'm really happy that the way things turned out. I have 100% mobility, so it went really well.
That's fantastic. So you had a successful surgery. Have you encountered other people as part of the ACDF community who have had different experiences?
I have discussed surgeries with other people who have undergone ACDF surgery, whether it was through trauma or degenerative arthritis or other conditions. And I've talked to several people who have not had a successful outcome and have either undergone a secondary surgery or, getting a second opinion from a surgeon. And some of it is not, there's thousands and thousands of things that can go wrong in a surgery, any surgery. So this isn't whether it has nothing to do with the surgeon, but again, finding a good surgeon is one thing, but being a good patient is another. And a lot of the successful outcome from these surgeries depends on being a good patient, not overtaxing yourself post-op, hearing to the warnings that your physician tells you, abiding by their advice on what to do, what not to do. And you learn quickly that if you do breach those, you have to remember that, your neck isn't fully fused, even though the device or the cervical plates that are used are technically holding your neck. And I know people that extend themselves doing strenuous work and end up actually, the screw will back out, when there's a plate involved, the screw will back out, or they'll end up cracking or, breaking that fusion that's just occurring. So I've seen both. A lot of successful. You can tell that someone who cared about their surgery, was educated about it, or was took the warnings that the surgeon gave them. And I've met the other people who it didn't go so well. And for the most part, most of the people that I discussed that it didn't go well, it was their own fault.
So you cover a lot more in the book besides just the surgery, the pain management. There's also issues of lifestyle and exercise, which we've touched on, but you also talk about insurance, your experience with insurance companies. And I know everything's different, but can you talk a little bit about your experience and what people might encounter or what they could do to prepare themselves prior to their surgery if they have the time to do so? Most
surgeries require pre-authorization or pre-approval for the surgery, and then the staff will put forth the paperwork to your provider. You have to make sure that you read the fine print within your health coverage, and most people don't. They're caught off guard. Here's an example. After my surgery, I received a large bill, and I was unaware that my surgeon used a third-party physician's assistant to do the follow-up after the surgery, and I didn't know that my insurance didn't cover the third party that under there. Most surgeons probably will have their own staff, so that's one of the questions that you want to ask is all in about your insurance company is are all of your staff covered? Do they work directly for the surgeon or the hospital, and is it covered? So you want to make sure when you get authorization, just because you got approval for the surgery, you still want to find out what is covered under that. The anesthesiologist, any assistants, the PAs, the APRNs, the nurses, who's the hospital staff. So you want to ask a lot of detailed questions, because Once the bills start coming in post-op, you'll probably be in more pain from the from the medical bills than you will the surgery. If you do your homework and you ask the right questions, again, this book, I was hoping to open up dialogue with it, with respect to insurance. Most insurance companies are pretty good. If you ask them, again, I think most people just see a bill and they want to know what to pay and what not to pay. But I think if you ask the right questions before the surgery, what are you looking at for the total cost of the surgery? The surgeon himself can break it down line by line and item by item. So that's one of the things I required. Besides the third-party vendor, that caught me off guard, but I got an idea of what it would cost, what the insurance company, is in charge of paying, what my expenditures would be, and it kind of prepares you financially for what's to come.
So what would you like people to take away from reading the book?
The most important thing I'd like people to take away is just the general aspect and general knowledge of what it's like to undergo ACDF surgery, from pre-op to post-op, all the way through from a layman's term. Again, I'm not a physician, but this entire book is approached from a patient's perspective of undergoing ACDF surgery. I think the most important thing is just educating yourself about the surgery is the most important thing. I know a lot of patients or people that I spoke to that had ACDF surgery. Some people don't want to know. They don't want to know, and they're just nervous or scared, and that's fine too. If that's the way that your psyche has to deal with this, or a person has to deal with surgery, that's fine too. If you're comfortable with that, I was not. I wanted to know as much as possible. So if you are an information seeker, and you're into how your body will react, what to expect, I think this book will cover it. And I haven't seen a book out there that covers from front to back, pre-op to post-op, of what it's like to undergo this surgery.
All right, Patrick, thanks so much for talking today. The book is ACDF, The Informed Patient. I'll put a link in the description below to see where you can get it. If people wanted to learn more about the book or your work, how can they find you on the web?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Chris. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss the book. If you want to find more about the book, you can find it on Amazon. You can go to my Instagram page, which is psmithacdf, or you can go to my website at www.neckfusionsurgery.com.
Fantastic. I'll put those in the link below as well. And thanks very much.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it.